يا نبي سلام عليك، يا رسول سلام عليك، يا حبيب سلام عليك، صلوات الله عليك. أبرز الله المشفع صاحب القدر المرفع، فملأ نور النواحي عما كل الكون أجمع. نكست أصنام شرك وبنا الشرك تصدع، ودنا وقت الهداية وحمى الكفر تزعزع. مرحبا أهلا وسهلا بك يا ذا القدر الأرفع، يا إمام أهل الرسالة، من به الآفات تدفع. يا نبي سلام عليك، يا رسول سلام عليك، يا حبيب سلام عليك، صلوات الله عليك. أنت في الحشر ملاذ، لك كل الخلق تفزع، وينادون ترى ما قد دها من هول أفظع. يا نبي سلام عليك، يا رسول سلام عليك، يا حبيب سلام عليك، صلوات الله عليك. اللهم صل وسلم. Share the other thing here, where is it? You cannot minimize a Zoom call when you're recording. Why not? All right, here we are. Plotinus on dialectic. Share the screen. Here it is. Maulana Yasin, could you please appear if at all possible so we can see your illumined visage and read from the beginning. Bismillah. Well, let me just Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد المصطفى النبي الأمي الطيب الطاهر الزكي صلاة تنحل بها العقد وتنفرج بالكرب على الأصحاب أجمعين. اللهم صل وسلم بأنواع كمالاتك في جميع تجلياتك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد أول الأنوار الفائضة من بحور عظمة الذات المتحقق بعلم البطون وفخوره مع الأسماء والصفات، فهو أول حامد ومتعبد بأنواع العبادات والقربات، والممد في عالم الأرواح والأشباح وجميع الموجودات، وعلى آله وأصحابه صلاة تكشف لنا النقاب عن وجه الكريم في المراء والعقادات، وتعرفنا بك وبه في جميع المراتب والحضرات. والطف بنا يا مولانا بجاه الحركات الساكنات واللحظات والخطرات، والطف بنا يا مولانا بجاه الحركات الساكنات واللحظات والخطرات، والطف بنا يا مولانا بجاه الحركات الساكنات واللحظات والخطرات. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون، وسلام على المرسلين، والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. تفضل مولانا.
Tis techne e methodos e epitedeusis hemas oidei
Allah.
poreutenai anage. Hopu men un de elten hos epitagathon kai ten arken ten proten testo diomologemenon kai di apollon deregmenon kai di hon tuto ede knuto anagonetisen tina de enai ton anak tesomenon arageton panta eton pleista pesin idonta hos ente prote genese eis gonen
Andros, yeah. Go on.
andros esomenu philosophu musicu tinos e eroticu homen de philosophos ten fusin kai ho musicos kai ho eroticos anakteo tis un ho protos arage es kai ho autos apasi tutois e catena
yes, he cathenais, yeah, estimen gon un heith.
Estimen un hei porea dite passin e anabainusin e ano elthusin hemen gad protera apo ton kato heidege deutera ois ede en toi noetoi genomenois kai oion iknos theisin eke poreu estai anake heos an esto eschaton tu topu apicontai ho de telos tes poreas on tonkane hotantis ep acro genetai toi noetoi al hemen perimeneto peridetes anagoges proteron perateon legen.
Thank you very much, Melan. Thank you very much. That, my friends, this is a sheikh, right, with a very proper i'tiqad in the Prophet Islam, with an alamiya background, who did a degree in classics at Cambridge. Classics. Thank you very much, Sidi. I'm very proud. Suddenly occurred to me earlier today, I'm going to show off Yasin Karatella to everyone. MashaAllah. It just shows that it's possible, everyone. This is what we need. All right, so what art is there? Bismillah. Maulana, are you right to read Maulana Niyaz?
Sure, inshallah.
I just like your voice. If it's any bother at all, please tell me.
No, mashallah, it's an honor. It's a great honor to follow. No, subhanallah, it's a great honor to follow upon Ustad Yasin. Mashallah, that was very nice to hear. Okay. So 1-3 on dialectic.
Yeah, actually, could you just hold on one moment? Because I've actually thought,
sure.
I think actually this would be rather nice, because then I can point to it and everyone can see. It makes it a little bit less digital. I mean, it's awful. This, I mean, alhamdulillah, allows us to meet, but I've forgotten again what the code was. Huh? Oh, yeah. Yeah. You might be able to see it. We should really show them the view, shouldn't we? But you can't really see it. All right. Yeah, one of the most incredible views in the universe here. The bay. We're on the mountains. All right. فلتتفضل.
Okay, bismillah. 1. What art is there? What method or practice which will take us up there where we must go, where that it is to the good, the first principle, we can take as agreed and established by many demonstrations.
Yes.
And the demonstrations themselves were a kind of leading up on our way. But what sort of person should the man be who is to be led on this upward path? Surely one who has seen all, or, as Plato says, who has seen most things and in the first birth enters into a human child who is going to be a philosopher, a musician, or a lover. The philosopher goes the upward way by nature. The musician and the lover must be led by it. What then is the method of guidance? It is one and the same for all these. Or is it one and the same for all these? Or is there a different one for each? There are two stages of the journey for all. One when they are going up, and one when they have arrived above. The first leads from the regions below. The second is for those who are already in the intelligible realm and have gained their footing there, but must still travel till they reach the furthest point of the region. That is the end of the journey. When you reach the top of the intelligible, that is the end of the journey when you reach the top of the intelligible. But that can wait. Let us first of all try to speak about the ascent.
Very, very nice. Thank you very much. So we're talking about Plotinus's On Dialectic, right? What art is there? What method or practice which will take us up there where we must first go? Where that it is to the good, the first principle, we can take as agreed and established by many demonstrations. So we know where we're going, but what we're discussing is our method of getting there. So we're going to the good, the first principle. Now, absolute must for us, I think, to return to Republic 7, not now, because, well, it would have been very easy if I'd had my library with me. But unfortunately, I'm sorry to be a bother, but the idea that I had was to take it quite a lot back so that I could stand in front of you. Yeah. Sorry about that. So we couldn't just move this back, because I'm sorry to be a bother. It's just that I think this is quite a good way. So maybe you could just sit over there. Then, so this is something we need to return to. That's where Imam Aflatun, as Fakhruddin Arazi thought it was all right to call him in the 1200s, but apparently we're too good for that. But anyway, quoting Imam Razi, who said Imam Aflatun, this is what Imam Aflatun said.
That's good.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Sidi. It's just
okay.
Very kind of you. This is what Imam Aflatun said about the method of dialectic and the ascent as well, you see. So, and where the end goal is. The end goal is the good, which is to be identified with the one, as in the first principle, the cause of being. What is being in Neoplatonic philosophy? Right? Anyone know being? Capital B being, any real type of being. Anyone know being? What's being? Anyone here? Capital B being. Being is intellect, the realm of intellect, which is the realm of the forms. It is the realm of the forms and the realm of the forms alone which possess true being in the Platonic tradition. So this is a basic principle that we need to understand. And most of Aziz, who sadly can't make it today because he's at a wedding, but who's also focusing on Platonic philosophy, you may remember the things that he posted on the group last week, which were about whether there were quotations from Findlay speaking about the forms and the real presence of the forms. The point is, the forms on this philosophy are the only things which have true being. What that means is the realm of becoming, which corresponds broadly to the Alam al-Mulk in the Akbarian tradition. I'm not saying they're direct, by any means saying that they're direct they are direct counterparts. It's fine. I'm not saying by any means they're direct counterparts, but they're definitely analogous. So that doesn't possess real being. Only the realm of the forms possesses real being. So this is very important. So the goal is the good. Now, what is the good? The epikeina is the good is epikeina tesousias. So the good is beyond being. The one is beyond being. Then the question arises, well, what on earth does that mean? Is there some strange paradoxical claim going on there? Or is that just to be construed in some other way? And the fact is, as much as we might like to read a lot more into it than is actually there, it actually just means beyond substance. So epikeina tesousias is mostly translated as beyond being, but all it really means is beyond substance. And insofar as being is identified with substance as primary being, then people make that identification. But what does it mean then is that what is being beyond substance? It means that you're beyond, we're beyond determinate being, where being is identified with the determinate, and Allah Ta'ala, when we speak about Allah Ta'ala, we mean Allah Ta'ala. And when I say the one, I'm not necessarily saying that the one as understood by Plotinus. In fact, I'm not saying that he, of course, has realized the fullness of the reality of Allah Ta'ala. For one thing, no creator being ever has, but that's not the reason that I'm negating that Plotinus. It's that he didn't have the benefit of the final revelation. And most of us don't have the benefit of it either, because we don't receive it properly. But the point is that it is available, and that there are stages of progression. In any case, in terms of the revelation of the fullness of the truth, I mean, the fullness of the truth was accessible in all that was necessary for people to, and it was accessible through the revelation given to Sayyidina Isa, the real original one. But the fullness of the manifestation, I think the best thing actually, Siddhi, is if we move, because it's just the lighting. I know I'm being very fussy, like some sort of diva. Yeah. But if we just move it over here, okay. I think what will happen is we'll be able to get decent lighting. I think the problem at the moment is that, yeah. So maybe that's the way to go. And then we can just move this. No, we can't. It's stuck to the ground. No, man. No, don't move it. No, it looks like it's a disaster to move. Yeah. All right. So, the full manifestation of the perfect Jamal and Jalal of Allah Ta'ala, the perfect madhab of Allah Ta'ala had to wait. No, it really is stuck to the ground. No, don't worry about it. Don't not a good idea. That depended upon the sending of the Prophet, because the Haqiqa Muhammadiyah has a temporal manifestation, which is the person of the Prophet. Excellent. Excellent idea. Yeah, but that's the wrong way around.
Yeah, I'll just move it.
So in any case, the beyond being is the one, and who is also identified with the good. That had to be made explicit if you're just looking at the dialogues by the Neoplatonists. That's true, but it's the identification of the one and with the good, who is beyond being, as in beyond substance, beyond determinate substance, which can be the substratum for other things, and is connected relationally to other things, is beyond that. That's in reports of Plato's unwritten doctrine. So it's not even the case that, it's not there in the dialogue, so it just has to be a kind of tafsir by the Neoplatonists. No, it's there also in the accounts of Plato's unwritten doctrines. The goal is clear. Now, where is this epikenotes ousios business come in? Again, there's this complete fantasy that it's not in Plato, but it is. It's in the Republic, the exact words. So it's not made up by the Neoplatonists either. Epikenotes ousios, beyond substance, is there. So we have. That's very kind. It's very kind. Study. What art is there? What method or practice? Well, it's dialectic, which will take us up there where we must go. What that is, that it is to the good, the first principle, we can take as agreed. We know where we're going, and established by many demonstrations. And the demonstrations themselves were a kind of leading up on our way, right? Which is anagoge, ascent. Yes, so what sort of person should the man be who is to be led on this upward path? Surely one who has seen all, or as Plato says, who has seen most things, and in the first birth enters into a human child who's going to be a philosopher, a musician, or a lover. So this is a doctrine of divine decree and of the pre-existence, in some sense, of souls, and I suppose you could say the isti'dadat azaliyah, that things have the isti'dadat azaliyah. That I'm trying to talk about nafs al-amr, as presumptuous as that sounds. So I'm not making exegetical statements all the time. We're trying to actually do philosophy. Doing exegesis of Plotinus is one thing that's important. But to some degree, we'll try to be faithful to all of this. And the point is, one can construe this as a doctrine of the isti'dadat azaliyah. Why is it that a particular soul comes into a particular body that is going to be a philosopher? That's a doctrine both of isti'dad and of predetermination. Right. So no, it's not a very egalitarian doctrine. In any case, so the philosopher goes and again we have some good notes here which you can go to the feeders. The philosopher goes the upward way by nature. And so what does it mean that he's seen all or most things? He's seen the forms. This refers to the forms, the ultimate realities of things. So the philosopher goes the upward way by nature. The musician and the lover must be led by it. What's the word for lover there, dear Yasin? It says homen de philosophos
Erotikos.
erotikos, yes, and you can imagine why. Now, of course, that word has been degraded in modern culture. If you could just read that sentence, Maulana, please.
Homen de philosophos ten pusin kai ho musikos kai ho herotikos anakteo.
Thank you very much.
Anakteo.
Yeah. Homen de philosophos ten fusin kai o musikos kai ho erotikos anakteo. Yeah. So, all be like Yasin, please. It's going to be difficult because he did a degree in classics at Cambridge and he's an alim, but he's living proof. You're a historical figure.
I wish I was, but sadly
whether you like it or not. Whether you like it or not. Whether he likes it or not.
Yeah, you're a historical figure. Yeah. Anyway, now this is really important. It's really, really important because, I mean, you just have to see someone who does it. Yeah. I mean, we're a bit miskin because there's lots of people who've already done that. One of them's called, you know, Mehmet the Conqueror. I mean, he knew Greek, and that was ages ago. And here we are, hundreds of years later, agonizing about whether should we do it. I'm worried about my Akida if I learn Greek. Yani, Mehmet the Conqueror wasn't worrying about his Akida. He was getting on with knocking down the walls of Constantinople under the guidance of his Akbarian sheikh, who was having kashf about what he should do at every moment. He knew Greek, and we're all worrying about, oh, shall I learn Greek? 20 years pass, shall I learn Greek? Do an istikhara, Habibi, do an istikhara. So in any case, it would be very, very helpful for everyone to learn Greek, and it's very, very much within reach. I only started just a few short years ago, you know, in earnest, and I know that we've. And I'll tell you what, there was a period of 15 years. It was like, I want to learn Greek. I want to learn Greek. I didn't have the opportunity. So the opportunity will come, but I would definitely grasp the opportunity. It's very, very beneficial. Okay, for understanding intellectual heritage. So, yeah, the philosopher goes the upward way by nature, you see. The musician and the lover, however, and again, sorry, I was saying that, you know, Eros has been degraded to mean just obviously, you know what, but it's not, that's not the original meaning of the word, is it? Yes, Eros in the Platonic tradition certainly is not limited to sexual desire. It embraces desire for the good and ultimately is a desire for the good in itself. Anyway, we'll go into that at another time, but it's just worth have a look into that if you get a chance. There's a lot of literature on it. So the philosopher goes the upward way by nature. The musician and the lover must be led by it. What then is the method of guidance? Is it one and the same for all these, or is there a different one for each? There are two stages of the journey for all. One when they are going up and one when they have arrived above. The first leads from the regions below. The second is for those who are already in the intelligible realm and have gained their footing there, yonder, but must still travel till they reach the furthest point of the region, that is the end of the journey, when you reach the top of the intelligible. But that can wait. Let us first of all try to speak about the ascent. Okay. I actually can't control.
Can I perhaps interject with a small question?
Certainly can. Certainly can.
So, Sidi Hasan, Jazakumullah. You mentioned that in the Akbarian tradition, when you reach the Alam al-Mulk, the Alam al-Mulk doesn't have real being. When you say that, I mean, I guess I'm trying to situate the notion in the Akbarian tradition that everything is some type of a manifestation of being. So
yeah.
I don't know if this is the place to maybe detail it, but
certainly is.
Nothing is technically outside the ambit of being in the Akbarian tradition, or perhaps what is meant is that nothing is outside of the realm of the manifestation of being in the Akbarian tradition, but that still is not being in and of itself. Maybe you could just
yeah, there's nothing outside of manifestation of being, and neither is the realm of becoming outside of the manifestation of being. So again, they remain analogous in that sense. What it is a question of is the thank you, sir. What it's a question of is a question of what possesses. Well, it's interesting to look at the meaning of ousia, right? Ousia is translated as substance, but as you'll find discussed quite widely, it's a really very useless and fundamentally misleading translation. And the reason for that is that just the development of the language, we tend to associate the word substance with kind of, hard-headed, common sense materialism of the modern man, which is of course not really common sense at all. Whereas that's just not the original meaning of the term. The original meaning of the term is what is most primary in reality. What is the primary being? And that's why it's often translated as primary being rather than substance. Now, so in the Platonic doctrine, primary being is the only thing that really exists. The world of becoming does have a type of participating mode of what you could call being, quote unquote being, but it's not being in the strict sense, as in it's not primary being, right? So it's derived being. Now, again, being is the determinate. It's the determinate in itself. Again, the world of becoming is not determinate in itself. It's only determinate insofar as it participates in the realm of real being. And so what you might say, it's an ontology of real being, i.e. the forms, and their determinations, i.e. the world of becoming, their determinations of the forms, through which the forms become present, right? And in the Akbarian tradition, well, the word being in the Akbarian tradition, again, can be very misleading because Allah Ta'ala is referred to as al-wujud al-mutlaq, as in mutlaq an al-qayd, hatta an qayd al-itlaq, right? But when you push the point a bit further, you find that al-wujud, we assume that there's a tradition of so-called asalat al-wujud, but that's far from being straightforwardly true, and I would argue it's not true at all. Anyway, but they explicitly say wujud is not a real name of Allah Ta'ala, right? It's only for tafhim, right? It's only to help you, in terms of the intellectual system, understand. We can't get away from using the word being, but this idea that there's something, this mysterious being in itself, which is what's being, and it's like being as a real cipher, as in the Avicennan tradition, where it has this mystical, and in the Thomists, the pure act of being, and all this empty verbiage, which they think is so significant, and this is just not. Why is it making that noise? Anyway, but no, being itself is Allah Ta'ala. That doesn't necessarily come with, and I would hope that it doesn't come with the useless doctrine that, which follows from this kind of, these little jumps of mental calculus, which Allah Ta'ala himself is supposed to be subject to, where God doesn't have an essence, he's just pure existence, right? Which is essentially the Avicennan doctrine. And then taken on by Thomists, and then it becomes this cult, which is in my view meaningless. In the Platonic tradition, which I happen to be aligned with most of the time, by no means all the time, it's also they are the paradigmatic, not Asalas al-Wujud people, they're the Asalas al-Mahiyya people for them, and it's the opposite of what you'd think. It's like, that's all Plato's beard, and they want to multiply the entities as much as possible and think that everything's real, and so existence must be this kind of mysterious thing in itself. But no, the Platonic tradition is its ertibadi. Being isn't a real property. So you find that in the henological account of being, which Platonists give, as in being is a function of the manifestation of unity, as in what is real is unity. Unity is what makes things determinate as that one thing. So the unity makes being, right? So it sounds paradoxical, but that's only because you're assuming that being is a real property. That's why it sounds paradoxical. It's not actually paradoxical at all. So, I've argued in the Things as They Are book that the Akbarian tradition is actually henological rather than ontological. And one of the reasons for that is, well, look, ahadiyya, wahda, wahidiyya, right? It's in the Nafs al-Amr book, in the bit called a short excursus on being in unity. So you have wahda, that if you look at how they explain all of those maratib, i'tibari maratib, of course, within our understanding of the Godhead, you will find that, as I said, not in himself. God is not multiple. There's a maratib aqliya, i'tibariya. Unfortunately, a lot of the esoterists who like to get excited by mystical sounding words falsely concretize those ways that help us understand, and they do end up with very problematic aqidah. If you think that God in himself is 3 in 1, you're in trouble. That's not God in himself. Those are maratib aqliya, i'tibariya, which help you understand the ta'ayyunat, essentially. So, of course, God in himself is not anything muta'ayyin. So, in any discernible sense that we mean, some people object that, well, it's not muta'ayyin. Well, that's a different sense of muta'ayyin. That means distinct and being who he is. That's different to what we mean by ta'ayyun. So, in any case, so if you look at what they mean by al-wahda and al-wahidiyya and al-ahadiyya, it's all henological. It's all henological. And if you try to find out what do they mean by being in itself, nothing. They just mean Allah Ta'ala. The beingness of it is not relevant. So
Can I ask a question?
yes.
How comparable then would you say the Ishraqi understanding of Nur is with this wahda or unity for the Platonists?
Well, the good or the one is also identified with Nur and light in Plato himself. That's the analogy given in the Republic. The light would be identified with pure, the pure effulsion of being. Their understanding is that in the pure unity, the pure simplicity of the essence of God, again using essence in a problematic way, if you're talking about beyond substance, but that the pure simplicity of the essence is what pours forth it's this immense dynamis panton. It's the power to be all things, which is contained in that simplicity and non-composite nature, right? And I'm not saying that follows by any sort of mental calculus or anything, but Suhrawardi is very explicit. Being is a Ertibari concept, and he's seen as being sure, if you're going to say, oh, being means light, then fine, you're talking about light and you're calling it being, right? Being's a very malleable concept, where's that coming from? Don't worry about it, it's fine. you know, if you look at, you know, Allahu Nur as-samawati wal ard, right? How is Nur often interpreted? If you look in,
someone's mic is not muted.
oh, could someone mute their mic, please? Sorry, it's making a noise which I thought was coming from the room. You know, that it's understood to mean he's mudhir of samawat wal ard. So that's how the things become distinct, right? How realities in essence has become distinct. In any case, it's an interesting map. We're not saying that there's something called abstract unity, which is the ultimate principle. No, we're not talking about the abstract concept of unity. But we're talking about unity is a more fundamental, if you look at the unfolding of the worlds of manifestation, it's more fundamental than whatever you might construe as being. I try to argue for that in that section of the book. Farja Ilahi, if you want to have a really exciting evening one day. But yeah. In any case, let's move on to the next. We're on the next page. Could you read, please, Maulana wa Habibi Yasin?
Proton de diastaltion tus andras tutus hemin arxamenus apo tu musicu hostis esti legontas ten pusin. Theteon de aiton eu kineton kai epto emenon men prosto kalon aduna to teron de par autu kinestai. He toimon de ekton tu konton oion ek tupon. Hosper oi hoi deloi prostus supus uto kai tuton prostus phtongus kaito kalon to en tutois toimon. Peugonta de aie to anar moston kai to me hen en tois ha domenois kai en tois hurut mois kai to eu rutmon kai to eus kemon dioken meta to nuntus aistetus tutus phtongus kai rutmus kai schemata hutos action corixonta ten hulen ep hon
What's hule, everyone? Hule.
So hule.
Hule. No, don't tell them. What's hule, everyone? Hule. Huh? Hula. Yeah.
Ep hon I.
You know, I just realized how idiotic I've been asking you to move around the whole thing.
Oh.
Yeah.
Why?
Because I realized they can't see anything that I'm pointing to. They're looking at the screen sharing and they can only see this tiny thing.
But I think you can see
I'm sorry about that.
I think we can see it at full.
Yeah, I know, but they don't have like, they're not sitting with a 70-inch Samsung. They're usually on a little laptop. Anyway, manage.
Analogiae kai hoi logoi eis to kalos to ep autois action kai didacteon. Hos peri ha ep toi to.
What kalos? Tell them what kalos is, Yasin.
Oh, sorry. Kalos.
Tell them.
Wait, did you say kalos, Sidi?
Yeah, kalos.
Fine things or beautiful things.
Yeah, it's a basic word, everyone. I'm sure you already know it, but just in case. All right, go on.
Hos peri a ep toeto ekena en hei noete harmonia kai to en taute kalon kai holos to kalon utoti kaloi monon kai logus tus philosophias en theteon ap on eis pistin acteon hon agnoe ekon tines de oi de hoi logoi husteron.
Yeah, no, later. Hustera means later. Okay, like, and it also means posterior, husteros. Yeah. Anyway, so light as the mudhir, that's exactly what the one does, right? Make something determinate. Like when you have a dark room and the light pours in, everything, it comes into definition. Suddenly you can see everything's become determinate. That is, so that, I suppose that would be an analogy to why the one is like the light, because in the intelligible realm, but also in the sensible realm, in the intelligible realm, it's the one which makes things determinate as what they are, right? But also I'm very equally the sensible realm. In any case, yes. So would you like to read Milan Niaz? Thank you very much.
Yes.
Eroticos. Oh, sorry.
No, not you, Milana. You've already read. All right.
Okay. Alhamdulillah. Thanks for that, Sidi Yasin. So, Bismillah. First of all, we must distinguish the characteristics of these men. We will begin by describing the nature of the musician. We must consider him as easily moved and excited by beauty, but not quite capable of being moved by absolute beauty. He is, however, quick to respond to its images when he comes upon them, and just as nervous people react readily to noises, so does he to articulate sounds and the beauty in them. And he always avoids what is inharmonious and not a unity in songs and verses, and seeks eagerly after what is rhythmical and shapely. So in leading him on, these sounds and rhythms and forms perceived by the senses must be made the starting point. He must be led and taught to make abstraction of the material element in them.
Yeah, go on, sorry.
Material element in them.
Sorry, go on.
He must be led and taught to make abstraction of the material element in them and come to the principles from which their proportions and ordering forces derive, and to the beauty which is in these principles, and learn that this was what excited him, the intelligible harmony and the beauty in it, and beauty universal, not just some particular beauty. And he must have the doctrines of philosophy implanted in him. By these, he must be brought to firm confidence in what he possesses without knowing it. We shall explain later what these doctrines are.
Yeah, very nice, thank you. Yeah. Ode erotic. I'm just read the next bit, and then we'll try and cover it as much as possible, because it's fairly simple actually. This treatise is really nice to get through. Ode eroticus eis hon metapesoi an kai ho musicos kai metameson he menoi an he parelthoi. Men monikos esti poskalus choris de on adunate kai methane pletomenos de hupo ton en opse kalon peri auta tuetai. Didaction un auton me peri hensoma Husonta eptoesthai al epipanta ection to logo somata decnunta, there's something wrong with the deck, to impassi toton kai hoti heteron ton sermaton. You need to turn that off to go down. You just press the, oh no, well done. Okay, kai hoti Alothen lection kai hoti an alois malon. Hoion epi te deumata kala kai nomus kalus decnunta. En asomatois gar ho ethismos tu erasmio. Ede kai hoti kai en techneis kai technais kai en epistemais kai en aretais Eta en poeteon kai didaction hopos egninontai apodeton areton ede anapabainen epinun nun epito on kake badisteon tain ano poreon. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. So no, it's right. So thank you. So the lover into whom those might need to move it. The lover into whom the musician may turn and then either stay at that stage or go on farther has a kind of memory of beauty, but he cannot grasp it in its separateness. But he is overwhelmingly amazed and excited by visible beauties. What are we saying here? We're saying that you can arise through this henological ascent to the good and to the one, this ascent to the real, through everything that exists, because it all points up to the real. That's how it exists in its being, is as determinations of principles of unity. And then this is why you have in later Neoplatonism the doctrines of procession and reversion. So you have proodos, which is procession, and epistrophe, which is reversion. Why? Because being proceeds from the one, that's procession, proodos, and then we return to the one, that's epistrophe, right? So it's a single hierarchy, but it's just, and of course there's a lot more to that than that, but just to, to give a very basic account. So you have, it's the single hierarchy of being. One is the emergence, the procession of being, and the other is the return to the one from the lower levels of manifestation. So, the musician is easily moved and excited by beauty. He must be taught to separate the material elements from the principles and the intelligible principles and the ordering principles and the harmony which represent the beauty in it, because those are the real. He needs to move beyond the mere manifestation. The manifestation is beautiful, but it's not the beautiful in itself. Okay, now of course this is very related to accounts in the symposium about the ascent to absolute beauty, and you'll find that in the footnotes that will be pointed out to you. And the lover also, he is overwhelmingly amazed and excited by visible beauties, but he must be taught not to cling to one corporeal manifestation, but must be led by the course of reasoning to consider all manifestations of corporeal being, trying to censor this as much as possible, and show that being is the same in all of the beauty is the same in all of them. And then he'll realize, well, hold on, the beauty is something higher than just these visible manifestations, and must be said to come from elsewhere, and that is better manifested in other things by showing him, for example. So the point is, he's seeing that those manifestations of harmony and these various types of symmetry and nice things in corporeal manifestation, which make them beautiful, and indeed to manifest different grades of beauty in this world, they are obviously, because they're all manifesting those same principles which are not from them in their particularity, they must be reflecting something higher than them. Yeah.
This is just a kind of a summary of the symposium.
It's just, yeah, more or less. I mean, you have to realize Plotinus considered himself to be a mere commentator on Plato. He was a loyal follower of Plato, very much in the manner that the loyal, was it Shift Command N? No, it doesn't feel like it. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. So the very much in the manner that the people in the school of Sheikh Akbar consider themselves to be jest commentators on the Sheikh Akbar. Right? They're from that school. Plotinus would, as has been noted very widely, he would have been horrified to think that he was in any way a Neo-Platonist, right? He would have been horrified. And he says that explicitly, that he's just a commentator of Plato. And that's all there is to it. So, so yes, I mean, he would have no problem with saying that. But of course, it's a different account. It's in a slightly different context, and you get more, as in generally in the commentary tradition, you get more out of it than you would get. You know, that's what a Shabbos does. It brings out different dimensions, right, which are of interest. So, but I do highly recommend, you know, when you see this cross-referencing, you know, take the time. Sometimes it's like 10 minutes. Take the time to go and look it up in the texts which are being referenced. It's actually very enriching and interesting. So, you know, it's the philosopher who is already inclined. This is what we're trying to say. The philosopher who tends to think abstractly. We're not talking about the sad, you know, mathematicized, autistic, you know, modern genius in the modern university who, you know, is this kind of sad, lonely, miserable creature who doesn't have any appreciation of beauty or metaphysics. Atheist and anyway, it's not that type of philosopher. It's the type of philosopher who is recognizable in this milieu that Plotinus is familiar with. It's the kind of Platonic model, and it's what you'd find in, and of course it's a broad sense of philosopher. I mean, as Sheikh Al-Akbar says, people amongst the Ahl al-Islam who have opposed Plato have only done so because of their ignorance of the meaning of philosophy, as in love of wisdom. So we're talking about a very broad sense of philosophy. We're not talking about, oh, just Ibn Sina, which is what the philosopher always means, which is very sad because Ibn Sina has a great mind, but he's actually a very bad philosopher, interestingly enough. So I know that's a bit contentious, but it is happens to be what I personally think. In any case, so the philosopher is already there, that appropriate level of abstraction, right? His soul doesn't need to move from corporeal things. This is the point that he made here. He is already there, looking at the principle, looking at the cause, looking at the principle of unity. Okay. But the philosopher, he is the one who is by nature ready to respond and wing. That's a reference to the Phaedrus. Winged, we may say, and in no need of separation like the others. He has begun to move to the higher world and is only at a loss for someone to show him the way. So he must be shown and set free with his own good will. He who has long been free by nature, he must be given mathematical studies to train him in philosophical thought and accustom him. So this is the person who has the isti'adad for philosophy. Again, philosophical thought and accustom him to firm confidence in the existence of the immaterial. He will take to them easily, being naturally disposed to learn it. He is by nature virtuous and must be brought to perfect his virtues, and after his mathematical studies instructed in dialectic and made a complete dialectician. I do apologize for my idiocy, Siddy, but I am going to move this back now because it just doesn't make any sense. I want to sit down. So don't worry, Siddy, just relax. Okay. All right, now. So, now, so what then is dialectic? Yeah, go on.
Just a quick question. So, for the philosopher,
Habibi, Isa.
No, I'm Sidi.
Can we see you?
Sure, briefly. There's a lot.
Right, no problem.
How are you, Sidi?
Hello, are you in Oxford? right now?
I am in Wolfson College
Oh, you're in
accommodation
Wolfson
now.
College. Oh, they have a Wolfson College in Oxford as well?
Yeah, they do. It's the same family.
Is it
the same
really?
yeah, it's a Jewish family. They had a lot of money and they decided.
Yeah.
Actually, the first president of Wolfson Oxford was none other than Isaiah Berlin.
Oh,
and we have a room. Actually, it's quite interesting. Next to the library, we have the Isaiah Berlin room,
yeah.
which is full of has nothing else other than his books, and you can only sit there if you're reading one of
A lot
his
of
books.
baraka there, Siddy. Gosh, like to do tabarak in there. Yeah.
There's no
But,
freedom.
yeah. I meant radiallahu anhum fil Islam, obviously. All right. Well, anyway, it's lovely to see you, Habibi. I hope, well, we're all in on this event next week, aren't we? So is it next week or?
No, I think it's in 2 weeks.
Yeah, so I'm very much, yeah. Well, no, I'm coming back in a week. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing you there, inshallah.
Very exciting.
Sorry, did you have a question or something?
I did, but I've forgotten it now.
That was my stratagem. No, I'm just kidding. Go on.
No. It's just so just to be clear on this point. So the philosopher then, unlike the other two categories, doesn't need to proceed from particulars, from an apprehension of particulars towards the universals. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, he's not so much in need. I mean, not to say not at all, but he's not so much in need of starting with the sensible and then shedding, what is material about it and finding what is immaterial and universal, for want of a better word, about it. Another really meaningless word, universal, which is overused and people don't know what they mean by it. But yes, it is that he has the isti'adad in his nature to get at the truth much more easily, and he's less likely to be. And it's not entirely types. I mean, obviously, if you talk about what's his name, Socrates in the Phaedo, he's talking about purification. So it can be a process, and these things can. But the Platonic tradition is very much an isti'adad tradition. Things are already set to a large degree before we come into the body, and I find that very Islamic personally, as much as it may irk certainly the spirit of the age, but which has fantasy of egalitarianism and so on. But then again, probably understood, this isn't a doctrine of prejudice or elitism. It's just a doctrine of reality. That's reality. People have isti'adadat. There's no way to get away from that. So, and they may reveal that later.
Sorry, Sidney, just a follow-up question then. The philosophy, so these aren't sort of mutually exclusive then, in the sense, I think
he's talking about broad types.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, they can't be mutually exclusive. No, of course not. No. I mean, there are musicians and lovers amongst philosophers, inevitably, but it's just they have more of that capacity. That's more emphasized in them. Yes, so what then is dialectic? So this means by which we ascend to the good and the one. What then is dialectic, which the former kinds of men as well as philosophers must be given? So they both use it is the science which can speak about everything in a reasoned and orderly way and say what it is and how it differs from other things, and what it has in common with those among which it is, and where each of these stands, and if it really is what it is, and how many really existing things there are, and again, how many non-existing things different from real beings. It discusses good and not good, the things that are classed under good and its opposite, and what is eternal and what not eternal, with certain knowledge about everything and not mere opinion. That's a rod on Aristotle, because he claims that dialectic doesn't give you certain knowledge. It stops wondering about the world of sense and settles down the world of intellect. So if you look at the introduction given by the translator it's in this document right at the beginning. I should have actually read it, but I forgot. It's very short, but he just says, this treatise is also a rad on Aristotle. I mean, he doesn't say that. Let's look at precisely what he says. He says, yeah. So it is an assertion of the, this is what's really of interest here, to focus our attention. Just because what I'm all about these days is the idea that we've been locked into this very reductive and limitary notion of what philosophy is, including in our own tradition. And it's really hurting us. And it's because we're identifying philosophy with this immanentist Aristotelian Avicennan approach, right? So I think what we really need to do, and it's a long process, not like all the answers are readily available, but we really need to consider that there may be completely different approaches to al-bahth and haqa'iq al-ashya', which are really much better suited to our purposes. So then the facile objection is, oh, well, that's what our great ummah has been doing for thousands of years. No, that's just what some people have been doing. And then, you know, a mixture of the decline of the aqliyat, the weakness of the ulama in the last few generations, terrible weakness, especially in Syria, no offense, and in the aqliyat, not another thing, so certainly not in tasawwuf or anything like that, but certainly in the aqliyat. And then, you know, our adopting an Orientalist narrative about our historiography and the different schools, thinking that Ishraqi means Suhrawardi, thinking that Al-Ghazali is the most important figure in our tradition when it comes to Haqa'iq al-Ashya', which he's a great, great figure in Al-Ain wal-Ra's, so I don't want to incur his or anyone else's wrath, but it's just not the case at all. He's not even referred to very much for 600 years. So, you know, it's not the case that what we think of as our heritage is actually our heritage. And so, you know, I think there's a lot of i'adat nazar which needs to happen. So one of them is, so what he's saying here in aid of all of that is the second part of the tree is given an exposition of Platonic dialectic based on the Republic, Phaedrus and Sophist, asserts its superiority to Aristotelian Stoic logic. Again, we tend to not even have a concept of there being anything other than Aristotelian logic in our tradition, is what I'm saying. We don't tend to even have a concept of there being anything other than Aristotelian logic. There's no critique of the categories. There's no question of, is this really the best method? Except by Ibn Taymiyyah. No, I'm just kidding. There are questions. There is questioning of it. Again, this is what I'm trying to say is the standard narrative would say, well, except Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah bad, stupid, hashahu. I don't like Ibn Taymiyyah, incidentally, and I don't think he's personally, I don't think he's a paragon of intelligence particularly, but I wouldn't also be rude about him. But in any case, that's the framing of the issue is that, well, it's basically fine and standard and there's nothing more to be discussed about it. But actually, there are a lot of things to be discussed about it. Generally, it is in the Akbarian tradition that you'll find this. And of course, one of the other great people who critiqued Aristotelian logic to a certain extent was Suhrawardi. So I just think this needs to be explored an awful lot more. So in any case, he's saying explicitly there that, you know, this treatise about dialectic is an assertion of the superiority of the dialectical Platonic method to, again, what is the Aristotelian doctrine that we've inherited from Ibn Sina? It's the doctrine that, oh, Plato, primitive Plato, is just dialectic, it's just jadal. You know, which is, you know, there's مؤلف من مقدمات مشهورة, right? And, you know, also you have the Khitabiya, which is really a subset of Jadal, which is, you know, مقبولة عند شخص. But that's the idea. Well, that's just because Aristotle was looking at Plato's dialogues, and in the dialogues, he's framing it in that context. He's framing it in the context that, because Socrates is talking to people and he's developing his argument on the basis of what is mashhur indahum. Isn't it the case that justice is gathered? And they say, oh, yes, yes. So Aristotle says, oh, that means that it's judderly in its essence, but the judderly form does not mean there isn't a demonstrative underlying structure, right? And that's exactly what the Neoplatonists would say. But also, it's just that there's an amazing immanentist prejudice in Aristotelian logic. Can you think, why? What do you quantify over in Aristotelian logic, Ibrahim?
Sorry.
What do you quantify over in Aristotelian logic? You quantify over individuals. Yeah. You're always told you have to quantify over individuals. It's the individuals that matter.
Yeah, it's a starting point.
Yeah. So universal quantification is all of the possible individuals. Existential quantification is at least one individual, right? It's all about individuals. Why? No one ever questions it. Actually, it doesn't make any sense. And that's why when you really try to apply Aristotelian logic, like by the letter of the law, it is a bit like Ibn Taymiyyah says. As much as I hate to say that, I'm very much not from the mashrab of thinking, oh, by the way, Ibn Taymiyyah is quite good, which some people, I'm not like that at all. We don't like Ibn Taymiyyah, where I'm from. But it is kind of true, that whole thing about it's like climbing up this big mountain to get some camel meat at the top. It's just not really worth the trip. I'm not saying it's not beneficial to. I've spent an awful long time studying Aristotelian logic, and I think it's very beneficial. But I just think, again, there are a lot of things that need i'adat nazar. One of the people who's spoken about what a Platonic logic really looks like is Findlay. He has an excellent article about that, which actually speaks to this particular point about the individual bias of Aristotelian logic. But then, what is Platonic dialectic? So one is the method of division, which is dividing most general categories into the divisions, the fundamental categories in which they divide into. But it's not just that. It's also then saying, well, given the way that we've just divided this, is it actually the case that our original thing we divided, the unifying principle, was actually the principle of unity? And very often through dividing it, you say, oh, actually, that's not, that thing we were dividing is not the real principle of unity of those things. And then you have the method of ekstasis, right? So you have diaresis, which is division, and then you have ekstasis, which is finding the principle of unity. And there are various different dimensions to dialectic, but the point is, it is and then there are people like. So there are different interpretations of that. One of them is perhaps that they were like the later Neoplatonists, the really late ones, who became obsessed with the harmonization of Aristotle and Plato, and started inclining more towards Aristotle, people like Simplicius and Olympiodorus and Damascus, not Proclus and Syrianus, because they explicitly, again, where they attack Aristotle a lot in very beautiful ways, and they also explicitly affirm the superiority of the Platonic dialectic. But Shaykh al-Akbar in the Futuhat says there's a mizan for everything, right? And the mizan of a specific type of reasoning is logic. But then he says there's a mizan for all of the different, there's a mizan for kashfi experiences, there's a mizan for a lot of the different realms of creation of particular sciences which pertain to them, of particular determinations of things, that there's a particular mizan for each. Now, and there are critiques of the categories in some of the Akbarian authors, and I'm not so much saying that a very clear, coherent critique of Aristotelian logic necessarily emerges. I would imagine that there is a lot that could be gathered there and a very strong argument could be made. But then again, you have to realize a lot of these authors also, Sayyid Sharif al-Jurjani, we know absolutely for certain, was an Akbarian in his conviction and some of his writings. But when he was doing kalam, he just did kalam. He wasn't one of these masjid people at all. And these are different approaches, which are, may well be legitimate. I'm not saying I know which one is more legitimate necessarily. I know which one that I personally prefer, but some Akbarians don't believe in masj. They don't believe you should try to synthesize. They believe you should keep them separate. So Sayyid Sharif al-Jurjani seems to be one of those who so when he was doing kalam, he just did kalam according to its maldur, right? The maldur of kalam. And when he was doing philosophy, it was ala qadr al-taqa al-bashariya. It was, so it's, when he was doing natural theology, it was natural theology just in terms of, what the mind left to its own devices can know. So, so yes, in that subordinated model, at a certain resolution of existence, Aristotelian logic may be just right. But the problem that they would have is when you start to universalize it to all of the dimensions of being. One person who has a very clear critique is Mullah Fanari in the beginning sections of his Balance. There's a very, very clear critique of what are definitely logical, a lot of logical assumptions. And we would say they were not very, they tended to be quite ahistorical in a way that we mostly should just learn from, because they were focused on the philosophy rather than the history per se. But on the other hand, I think that it's also true that looking at the historical unfolding of things can be very beneficial, as long as you have the philosophical as your main focus and it's already there presupposed. But I mean, yeah, they're different. It's not just a very clear cut. I'm saying it's like, it should be a mahal fi i'adat nazar. We need to go back and start and think about these things. Everyone's bleating about tajdeed, and really it's a bit of a shame that anyone ever brought up that lafz in our time. It's a bit embarrassing, actually, frankly. But I'll tell you what, a bunch of muqalladun are not going to do tajdeed. Yeah, not going to happen. And I'm afraid, but I'm just saying muqalladun are not going to do tajdeed, especially in this time. You need to be a muhaqqiq. And in our time, the tahqiq has to be of methodology. It has to be on that level. Absolutely. And the truth is, it's always been on that level. It hasn't always been explicit, but you have a Dawani or someone, he knows the methodology of Suhrawardi, how it differs from the Avicennan methodology, how it differs from the Akbarian methodology. Find me someone who really understands the differences between the different methodologies and can do the tarjih really of all of those schools. I'd like to see someone who can do that. I've met one person who I believe could probably do that. Have good reason for thinking that he can do that, but he's so fed up with everything and everyone that he doesn't want to see anyone see. What then is dialectic, which the former kinds of men as well as philosophers must be given? It is the science which can speak about everything in a reasoned and orderly way and say what it is and how it differs from other things, or what it has in common. So the point of today, just to introduce you to this idea, Platonic dialectic. Al-Kanus, in his handbook of Platonism, goes into it a little bit in a very accessible fashion, and he's a middle Platonist who's asserting the efficacy of, but he's not, let's say, the highest rung of Platonists, and Plotinus was really something else, not only Zahiran, but Batinan, as well, as you've probably read in those excerpts from Life of Plotinus. What does have in common with those? So the point of today is just introducing there's this thing called Platonic dialectic. You've got some nice references here to go and have a look. I mean, the point is, it is a little bit less, pin-downable than Aristotelian logic deliberately. But we should be able to pursue this further and try to understand a little bit about what this is. So say what it is and how it differs from other things, and what it has in common with those among which it is, and where each of these stands, and if it really is what it is, and so on. We've done that. It stops wondering about the world of sense and settles down in the world of intellect, and there it occupies itself, casting off falsehood, and feeding the soul in what Plato calls the plane of truth, using his then again the reference, using his method of division to distinguish the forms and determine the essential nature of each thing, and to find the primary kinds. These are the magister gene, right? The magister gene, the primary kinds, or the supreme genera, if you like. There we go. Ta prota gene. Right. The primary kinds, which are the supreme categories of the intelligible world, even though categories would be a confusing because of the because of Aristotle. And weaving together, but this is what the 6:1 to 3 is all about. And weaving together by the intellect all the issues from these primary kinds. So the primary kinds are the governing principles of the intelligible world. Till it has traversed the whole intelligible world, then it resolves again. So this is what you're trying to reach. So some of the important principles you're trying to reach through dialectic. Ultimate principles of unity. So the Platonic dialectic is a henological ascent. It's not purely rational. It presupposes a spiritual purification, which he's about to say, actually. Then it resolves again the structure of that world into its parts and comes back to its starting point. And then keeping quiet, for it is quiet insofar as it is present there, it busies itself no more, but contemplates having arrived at unity. Here we are. It leaves what is called logical activity, about propositions and syllogisms, to another art, as it might leave knowing how to write. Get rid of this area. Some of the matter of logic it considers necessary as a preliminary, but it makes itself the judge of this, as of everything else, and considers some of it useful and some superfluous and belonging to the discipline which wants it. Okay, if you look at note 2, Plotinus speaks of logic here and in chapter 5 in very general terms, which apply both to Aristotelian and Stoic logic. The essential difference for him between logic and dialectic is that logic deals with words and sentences and the relationships, but dialectic discerns the relationships between things. The only true reality is the forms with which the mind of the dialectician is in immediate contact. Okay, so then 5, we're actually almost at the end of this. It's a really interesting, very short treatise. Episteme. What's episteme first? Knowledge, science. He episteme aute, he nous didosin enarges archas, etis laben donaito psuche, eta ta eches kai sunthesi, kai sum pleke kai daire, eos esteleon nun eke. It's always difficult to know how to read Greek because it's not a living tradition, although there are still Greek people. But in a lot of in the modern academia, it's done in this kind of posh English accent because that's just what they have available. So it's like Estigar, facen aute to catharotaton, nu kai phronesius, anagke timeotaten usan exinton en hemin, perito on kaito timeotododron. So that just doesn't sound right. There's no way that Plotinus spoke like that. But we don't know. I mean, it's probably more like the modern Greeks, where it's more like Estigar facen aute to catharotaton, no kai phronesius, anche un temiotate, os an accent. So anyway, I don't know exactly how to do it. I fluctuate between the two. The one you really have to avoid is the American. Yeah. Because that would be like, and again, un temiotate, usan exen ton en hamin perito on kaito temiotate, and I Fronis in men periton on, like, I mean, noon de perito epicena to anas. Yeah, definitely not going to work. So if you're American, I'm half American, but you can't do that. Okay, you're going to have to put on an accent. I'm not sure what an Arabic accent would sound like doing it, but that would probably be more appropriate. Anyway, for Plato says, dialectic is the purest part of intelligence and wisdom. So anyway, for Plato says, dialectic is the purest part of intelligence and wisdom. So since it is the most valuable of our mental abilities, it must be concerned with real being. So anyway, you've got the distinction here between phronesis and nous. Okay, so phronesis is again a very basic and important term, which is a kind of practical wisdom, usually. But here he's distinguishing between an absolute form of what you'd call intuitive reason, and which is nous, and which is the domain of intellect, noesis, and then phronesis, which still has that element of movement of the soul. I mean, the usual distinction is between dianoia and noesis. Dianoia is the movement, is the type of intelligence where you construct premises. There's a movement, like you're not directly acquainted with reality. You're moving from premise to premise. Nous, on the other hand, is having direct kashf of the state of affairs, the distinct state of affairs, a direct relation to it. So that's in the sense call it. But when phronesis is usually used, it's usually used in the sense of practical reasoning, a kind of practical wisdom, which obviously presupposes, I suppose, dianoia in that sense of the movement. So dianoia, that realm of that degree of intellectual activity, which involves movement, is going to be identified and is in the Platonic tradition with soul, the domain of soul, because soul is the motive force, the motive power. As an actual hypostasis, it is it's what looks to the forms and then wants to create more manifestations. It wants to move. It wants to look at what's stable and unchanging in the forms and create productively. That's why, in this system, soul as a hypostasis, as an actual level of being, is productive of what's it called? Nature, physis, which is, I mean, Armstrong even thought that was a fourth hypostasis, but it's not a fourth hypostasis. It's considered to be the lower part of the world soul. So the world soul is the soul of the world, right? Which I always found amazing, that when it says in the Quran, قالتا أتينا طائعين. Allah speaks to the earth and the heavens. What's the particular? Anyone remember the particular verse? قالتا أتينا ائتنا طوعا أو كرها قالتا أتينا طائعين. In any case, there are a lot of different ways of looking at. I mean, the Quran has, because of its inimitable nature, has just such a wealth of meaning that exceeds any attempt to pin it down. So I don't think any translation, however clever, is a very good idea, because you're still trying to pin it down. The best you could do would really a paraphrase, trying to bring out as many of the meanings as possible. But in any case, the world soul is the soul of the world that unifies all of the phenomena. So the world has a single soul that makes the world one world, and the lower part of the world soul is nature, and nature in, as it were, capital N nature. Nature in Plotinus means all of the logoi, all of the reason principles that make the world intelligible, insofar as they're related to the corporeal entities. Nature for Plotinus is not the corporeal entities themselves. That's a lower level. So, in any case, for it must not be thought to be a tool the philosopher uses. It is not just bare theories and rules. So he says, our dialectic in philosophy is the same, is the valuable part of philosophy. For it must not be thought to be a tool the philosopher uses. It's not just bare theories and rules. It deals with things and has real beings as a kind of material for its activity. It approaches them methodically and possesses real things along with its theories. It knows falsehood and sophism incidentally as another's product, and judges, you see, because it doesn't arise from real being, and judges falsehood as something alien to the truth in itself, recognizing when anyone brings it forward something contrary to the truth. So it does not know about propositions, they're just letters, but in knowing the truth, it knows what they call propositions, and in general, it knows the movements of the soul, what it affirms and what it denies, that's dianoia, and whether it affirms the same thing as it denies or something else, and if things are different from each other or the same, whatever is submitted to it, it perceives by directing intuition. Ascent perception also does, but it hands over petty precisions of speech to another discipline, which finds satisfaction in them. Right? Sound familiar? Yeah? Petty discipline which finds satisfaction in petty precisions. Sound familiar? Yeah. Bit of a shame, really. Okay, so dialectic is the valuable part. Philosophy has other parts. It also surveys the nature of the physical world with assistance from dialectic, as the other skills use arithmetic to help them. Though natural philosophy stands closer to dialectic in its borrowing, in the same way moral philosophy derives from dialectic on its contemplative side, but adds the virtuous dispositions and the exercises which produce them. There's the purification. The intellectual virtues have principles from dialectic, almost as their proper possession, although they are with matter, most of their principles come, although they are with matter, most of their principles come from that higher realm. The other virtues apply reasoning to particular experiences and actions, but practical wisdom is a kind of superior reasoning concerned more with the universal. It considers questions of musical implication, whether to refrain from action now or later, whether an entirely different course would be better. Dialectic and theoretical wisdom provide everything for practical wisdom to use in a universal and immaterial form. Can the lower kinds of virtue exist without dialectic and theoretical wisdom? Yes, but only incompletely and defectively. And can one be a wise man and a dialectician without these lower virtues? It would not happen. They must either proceed or grow along with wisdom. One might perhaps have natural virtues from which the perfect ones develop with the coming of wisdom. So wisdom comes after the natural virtues and perfects the character. Rather, when the natural virtues exist, both increase and come to perfection together. As the one progresses, it perfects the other, for in general, natural virtues are perfect both in vision and character, the principle of which we derive them, the most important thing both in natural virtue and wisdom. Okay, stop the show. Thank you, everyone. Now, just to keep to our promise, we'll read from page 35, the doctrine of the CPR. Could you read, please, anyone who's happy to do so? Yeah, but shout. Okay. Yeah, I just don't want to always bet. Yes.
Yeah.
Doctrine of the CPR. Okay. Yeah.
It is a commonplace that the most fundamental question at the heart of the problematic of Kant's philosophy is that of the limits of knowledge. In the first critique, the critique of pure reason, he seeks to determine the nature and prospects of theoretical reason, which he opposes to the practical reason that he would later treat in the critique of practical reason. The distinction between theoretical and practical reason originates with Aristotle and is preserved in both Arabic philosophy and Latin philosophy in the Middle Ages. In these philosophies, theoretical reason is that which seeks to attain the truth of how things are, whereas practical reason treats human action, specifically how it should be. The broadly Aristotelian conception of theoretical reason takes as its starting point self-evident first principles, both of conception and ascent, and sense experience, to which it applies the tools of syllogistic logic in order to provide demonstrations of conclusions to particular philosophical questions yielded and seen to have been rendered certain and indubitable by the application of this method. On this particular traditional model, theoretical reason in metaphysics, mathematics, and physics can yield demonstrative necessary results, whereas practical reason in specific applications of ethics, law, politics, and the like, in concerning matters which could have been different, is only able to yield contingent truths, that is, truths which it is not contradictory to deny, and thus, unlike necessary truths, are in principle revisable. As is his wont, Kant substantially upturns this traditional Aristotelian understanding. For Kant, after his critical turn, the theoretical metaphysics is no longer able to yield necessary truths about its conclusions. It can no longer provide demonstrations of special metaphysical questions, like those of the existence of God and the nature of the soul, which become merely practical questions, nor a general metaphysical account of the intelligible structure of reality. Kant brands dogmatic those metaphysicians who reach their conclusions about putative, non-sensory realities without first examining the legitimacy of the claim that human reason is able to justifiably reach those conclusions. Setting out to subject reason to just this critique, Kant finds that traditional metaphysicians are guilty of merely playing with pure concepts, a quite sterile activity, dismally unfitted to produce real knowledge.
So he talks about, traditional metaphysics as he finds it in Wolff and so on, as a mere grasping amongst concepts. Yeah.
The changes wrought by Kant are thus dramatic. He has discounted traditional metaphysics, which for most of 2,000 years had been viewed not merely as a genuine science, but as the supreme and universal science, from which all of the special sciences derive their first principles. Yet Kant believes that his revolutionary conclusions are justified precisely by the very examination of human cognition that he has accused traditional dogmatic metaphysicians of having failed to carry out. When the structure of human cognition is examined, it becomes evident that it is unable to reach the lofty goals that it cannot help but set itself.
Okay, thank you very much. So again, if concepts are not rooted in reality, and there's no intelligible realm underlying the immanent appearances of concepts, and they're supposed to be rooted somehow in this substratum of primary being, which is form and matter. I'll ask a question to anyone, and there's a definite answer, by the way. And this is not to catch anyone out, just for the sake of discussing and all of us learning, and I have much more to learn than any of you probably. But did Occam believe in the extramental existence of form? It's not
as far as I recall, no.
Yeah.
As far as I recall, that he did.
Yeah, that's the far be it from you, Sidi Niaz, because I consider Niaz to be a Wahhabite, but there's no doubt whatsoever that Occam believed in the extramental existence of form. There's no doubt whatsoever. He says it very explicitly, and it's just part and parcel of his basic Aristotelianism, because Aristotle believes that the primary substance is not talking about his embarrassing statements about incorporeal substances, which are causes of motion that he thinks are about 49 because of the different celestial spheres, but which are just causes of motion. But substance really that he's talking about all the time is, well, what is he, in the categories he talks about primary substance and secondary substances. Primary substances are individual, secondary substances are the universalized apparatuses of species and so on, which attend those individuals. Those are secondary substances in the categories. He changes his terminology in the metaphysics. Primary substance becomes form, right? Which, you know, Thomists like Joseph Owens, who are part of the Thomistic cult where Thomas and Aristotle are always right somehow, get very excited about that. But the truth is, it's form, as he very, very unclearly, but definitely says in the Zeta, that form for Aristotle is simply form and I'm not talking about the incorporeal substances, which are an embarrassment, but is just form insofar as it is determined in the individual as part of the hylomorphic fusion of form and matter, right? So no Aristotelian cannot believe in the extramental existence of form, right? The question of Occam and everyone else is the question of universals and whether they exist extramentally. Now, a universal is, a logical universal is the thing which exists outside is the form, and that's what it refers to. And Occam was saying that universal doesn't exist because it's a universal, it's a mental entity. It's got all those qiyud ma la yamna'u nafsa tasawwur mafhum anything. And the thing which is out there is the form. It's not the universal. So does that make him a nominalist? That's what Aquinas believes. That's what Avicenna believes. That's what everyone believes. It's one of the. I mean, I find that excerpt from Metaphysical Themes so interesting because Pascal just blows the idea of nominalism actually referring to anything in reality completely out of the water. And he shows that the whole nominalist debate was a debate about the status of the categories, because the good Ash'ari Mutakallim that he was, Occam believed that the only category which actually exists is quality. Of course, apart from substance, what does substance involve? Form. So he believed that form exists. Form, and he believed that quality exists. He didn't believe that quantity and relation, these things exist. Okay, which is exactly what the Mutakallimun believe. But actually, for tahqiq, it's not even a real debate because it's about i'tibariya and nafs al-amrs and so on. What does it mean to say they exist as extramental particulars? But in any case, you know, for Aristotle, the forms, what are the categories, rather? What's the ontological status of the categories? The categories for Aristotle are some of the primaries, okay? So he considers them to be amongst tone proton, okay? He considers them to be amongst the primaries, right? And so that means they don't come into being, right? What comes into being? The individuals, right? Again, so you think, well, this sounds very promising. He believes that the categories and form and matter are amongst the primaries and they don't come into being. That sounds just right, doesn't it? But he says very explicitly, if you follow the argument in the Metaphysics, this is what Alexander of Aphrodisias says he means. And Occam tends to be very close to Alexander of Aphrodisias, by the way. But I mean, I can show you, if you want, very clearly, such that I challenge you to doubt it after you've seen it, that he says the categories do not exist except potentially, because all that really exists, all that is really and arche in the sense of a cause of being, is the form insofar as it's individualized. So when he says they don't come into being, all he means, and he says this explicitly, is that they exist potentially, i.e., you have a new animal coming into existence. It presupposes form, right, which doesn't come into existence because it's already there as an ingredient, right? Where? In the preceding animal, Habibi. He's very explicit and clear. It's there in the preceding animal. So it's simply a question begging, circular, which doesn't talk about exemplary causation at all. And the categories, for him, if you follow carefully, what is the ontological status of the categories in Aristotle? The categories in themselves, which are those primaries, which don't come into existence, which don't come into being, they're not generated, as individuals are, they don't have any ontological status at all. Just as form in itself has no ontological status at all. And he's very explicit about it. And so it's simply a question begging the form as abstractions and the categories as abstractions don't come into being because they're the prior ingredients presupposed in the emergence of any individual. He knows that because he spent 20 years at the academy. But his whole obsession is how we can stay away from the horror of, it's like the modern, bourgeois, wallpaper, flowery wallpaper hobbyist who has their mortgage and their savings and peers out of the blinds to spy on the neighbors. And Aristotle's a bit like that. He's a bougie, right? Aristotle's a bourgeois. He wants anything like novel, exemplary form, not intelligible reality in itself. So he's obsessed. Everything has to be immanent, has to be in the. And the medievals have, including Ibn Sina, Aquinas, all of these people who make Aristotle so much more attractive. They're doing that because for Ibn Sina, you've got the theology of Aristotle as one of his sources. You've got the Al-Idah fil Khair al-Mahd as one of his sources. Aquinas has Augustine. He's got Dionysius Areopagite. He's got Liber de Causis as well, and so on and so forth. And they can't differentiate between them, and they start to be able to. Ibn Sina started to doubt: is this really all Aristotle? Apparently, and Aquinas realized, he's the person who realized that Liber de Causis, which for hundreds of years had been thought to be written by Aristotle, was actually Proclus, because William of Moorbeck had just translated the Elements of Theology just then into Latin, and he had access to a copy, and he started comparing because he knew it inside out. Liber de Causis, he wasn't a slouch. He knew it inside out. He was like, hold on, this is a paraphrase of this very, very. It's like there's no doubt about it. So he was the one who showed that. And then they also have the benefit of their revelations. A fully pristine revelation in the case of Ibn Sina, which sadly he didn't pay nearly enough attention to. And then in the case of Aquinas, bits and bobs, but they also help to make their philosophies ultimately much more satisfying. But I really don't understand how people can spend a lot of time with Aristotle and think that he's good news. All of the stuff to do with also the soul as the form of the body, which people, with their wide-eyed cultic Thomism, they're like, the soul is the form of the body. It's so wonderful. It's a disaster. It's a materialist doctrine, which is absolutely horrifying. And it's exactly, that was the whole problem they had with the resurrection of the body, because the soul is just the actualization of a body. That's why they had such a problem with it. Whereas in Platonism, there's a clear dualism. The soul is from the realm of soul, body is the study, and then they come together, and they're very much separable as well. But no, it's like, the Thomists, it's giving real dignity to corporeality as something genuinely cherished and wanted by God. Why? Because the incarnation.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, incarnation. Like the absolute himself has to somehow really come into a body. That works with Aristotle. It doesn't work with anything, but it works with Aristotle a lot better than it does with, and that's why you have this really pronounced horror of Platonism and people committed to this strange cabal like Gilson and others. Anyway, I'd like to share with the group, I'd very much appreciate if you wouldn't share it beyond, but the research that I've been doing on Aristotle, on the genera, whether genera are principles or not, so including the most primary genera, which are indivisible, which are the categories, and all the different treatments he has of them, whether they're principles in the sense of causes of being, and then the problems that Neoplatonists see where you want to have your cake and eat it, Aristotle, because you want to say the causes of knowledge, but you won't say the causes of being. And then exactly the Ontology. I'd like to share that with all of you so that you can see, hopefully, that you know, there's a very, very strong argument, by no means my argument, but it's something that there's a long tradition of this line of critique of Aristotle. In any case, so we've done I had to just quickly read the end of the On Dialectic because it's mostly because that's just getting into so many different issues that it's not something that I can cover right now. But I think we went through the first part quite comprehensively. The take-home point is that we need to have an i'adat nazar of the suitability of Aristotelian logic, which is biased towards the individual particular. That's what you quantify over. You have to quantify over the individuals, and that really doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's why it's not really quite as good a tool for truth-seeking, arguably, as we might think. And that was certainly the Neoplatonic view, which is that there is a higher tool, even though Plotinus doesn't really want to call it a tool, but there's a higher set of apparatuses which he calls dialectic, which they explicitly affirm to be superior to Aristotelian logic, which are very much involved are more identified with noesis rather than dianoia, and which are very much presupposing the process of purification. There's something that we need to really have the i'adat nazar of. And then there's that beautiful distinction between, you know, the musician and the lover and the philosopher in terms of the isti'adadat azaliyah. As they come into the world, some people need to move. They have the same goal, which is the one which they identified with the good, which is epikenetes ousias, beyond being, but some need to move via corporeal things to extract the real intelligible essence, which is not, again, abstracted from it. Sorry, I didn't just say abstracted. Sorry. What I meant is they need to separate the real intelligible content from the mere corporeal faint trace of that intelligible content, which is what it really is. It's just a faint trace of the corporeal. The intelligible God is no way abstracted from that. It's an ontologically prior domain, the intelligible content, the beauty in itself, which is just being determined, is becoming determinate, you see. It's a completely inverted understanding of the world. Whereas the other thing is, no, the real reality is the individual particular, and we abstract the universalized content somehow, because it's not really there, but somehow, and then it just kind of floats in this kind of state of non-being, where, you know, and we have to agonize about, well, does it really have being or not, you know, and then, you know, this whole realism, nominalism debate, which never happened. Very interesting. Anyway, the thing is, I agree with Kant that it's just a grasping among concepts, that rubbish form of philosophy. Yeah. Anyway, do we have any discussion points or anything before we close? It's been quite a long session today. Discussion point.
Afwan Sidi, I have one question, and if you'll indulge me, to make a connection in. I have a question with respect to the tract you read on dialectic. So Plotinus sets out the lover, the artist, and the philosopher.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that, well, with respect to Eros, if I can just read 3 lines from 3.5, Aeneid 3.5. And he says, he's speaking about Eros, he says, and so this being, love, has from everlasting come into existence, and from the soul's aspiration towards the higher and the good, and he was there always, as long as soul too existed. And he is a mixed thing, having a part of need, in that he wishes to be filled, but not without a share of plenitude, in that he seeks what is wanting to that which he already has. And then he goes on to say, Eros is born of plenty and poverty. Now, would it be fair to say that the lover, the musician, and the philosopher, that this Eros is, in the sense that they have these different capacities, but each one is drawn on that anagogical movement of dialectic through this erotic yearning?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so with the distinction between the lover in that triad of lover, artist, philosopher, is it simply that the lover and the artist have to, as he says, the philosopher is born with those wings from the Phaedrus? And so is it a matter of capacity to see these material instantiations as translucent, as transparent, and leading back up? I mean, is that the distinction? It's just merely the capacity that they're born with?
Sidi, I appreciate how you're with your excellent adab, you're putting that into the form of a question, but you're illuminating us with your knowledge, which is exactly what I want. So I mean, I could say, yes, it is, you're right, but and then I'd look like I was the one validating it, but you're the one telling us it. It's that's beautiful.
Well, no, I try to dispense with humility as much as I can, but no, I guess what I'm asking is Eros in the treatise on dialectic, is he speaking about merely the sort of I forgot what he calls it, the vulgar or terrestrial Aphrodite as opposed to other?
I think I see your point. I think Sidi, dear Yasin, our historical figure here, and I really mean that. For anyone who joined late, Yasin has been reading the Greek, and he knows Greek, and he's a classical scholar. He's also got a very strong, I think he's done a whole Alamiya course as well. And I'm very, very hopeful that this is the way forward. It's much, much more important than learning Latin, because that's another derivative from Greek philosophy language. So I agree with him that, well, I think in that particular context, he is mostly talking about that type of corporeal dimension in terms of love and seeking to realize and pursue something they call desire. In any case, it's definitely a broader category, definitely a broader category, Eros. I'll share some papers on that so you can look into that. It's much broader, absolutely, as you say, Sidi, Ratib. That it is Ratib, is it?
Yeah, Ratib. My mother, who's an American, put in the H to save me from the disgrace of having a name with the word rat in it. But yes, it's
hashtag. Hashtag. But that is definitely the case in the Platonic tradition. Eros means it's appetition, it's desire ultimately for the good. It's not that. So I mean, that's part of that scheme of the real being in a hierarchical order, where the lower domains of manifestation are just reflections of that higher domain. So the whole point is, as per the symposium, that love of material beauty is ultimately just a love of beauty. That's what it really is. Anyway, I'll share on that because it's very interesting. But I agree with you, Ratib. Yes, I think so. I doesn't ring a bell, that particular part of 3.5. I'd be grateful if you'd share it with us. But
I'll take a picture of the page as a reference. It's from the Loeb.
Oh yeah, okay, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sidi Hasan, I have a kind of a really burning question, although you can do
Yes,
it later. Astaghfirullah. So he talks here about the musician, the advice that he gives to the musician. He must be led and taught to make abstraction of the material element in them and come to the principles from which their proportions and ordering forces derive, and to the beauty which is in these principles, and learn that this was what excited him, the intelligible harmony and the beauty in it, and beauty universal, not just some particular beauty. And he must have the doctrines of philosophy implanted in him. My question for you, Sidi, how presumably does the teacher instill this in the musician? Is it done dialectic? Well, let me rephrase that. Is it done through logical demonstration, through a kind of burhan, or is it done through some kind of an intuitive attempt to make the person realize the truth of these ideas in an intuitively direct manner? I'm a little bit more than a little bit curious about this particular issue, if you have any ideas about this.
Yeah, I mean, there'd be no more than ideas. I mean, precisely what is meant, how much is this supposed to be a definite program, or is it just kind of a literary device insofar as he's just explaining a philosophical concept and trying to do it in this way? But I mean, the immediate answer one would want to give is, well, look, I mean, there's lots of different things. One would be the Phaedo, where Socrates talks about, the philosopher's real business is dying and trying to stay as far away from the body as possible, that this takes place via a process of purification. And there are exercises, I mean, as Plotinus says later on, there are exercises which would need to be undertaken. They're not necessarily as exotic as it sounds. Incidentally, Plotinus was dead set against what would later emerge as in terms of the theurgical practices, and he's very against bringing in magic and sullying what he considers to be direct contemplation. And so there's a big, after Iamblichus, who comes directly after Plotinus, and then Iamblichus enters into a controversy with Porphyry about the Egyptian mysteries, because Iamblichus wants to bring in the Chaldean oracles, and he wants to bring in a lot of Hermetic material, and he wants there to be a lot of, he wants there to be a strong magical element, and that's not Plotinus's mashrab. He's a good old Wahhabi when it comes to all of that. I think he says somewhere that or something like that. But he's dead set against all of that. So yeah, I mean, the point is, it's not going to be theurgical practice, but just basic exercises like not eating so much. I mean, that kind of, reining in the nafs, not letting it do everything it wants to do all the time. I mean, that's definitely something you find throughout. I mean, reining in, that is part of just in the tripartite, the logostikon, gaining, reigning in the tripartite model of the soul, reigning in the appetitive and the spirited, not always giving into anger. That is that's part of the process of purification, but there are a lot of different elements. Another thing is yes, the dialectical process. That is a kind of purification, subjecting your mind to the discipline of thinking things through in terms of division, in terms of deresis, in terms of finding the principle of unity, ekthesis, disciplining it to the dialectical procedure is also a type of purification. And that's why in Plato's 7th letter, you have that very, very famous, very, very central to the Neoplatonists, and that very famous section about, which is where, the illumination is, because Plato is saying, when you go through this process of really rigorous dialectic and apply it to a particular mabhath, you find your mind suddenly is flooded with light. Suddenly the failed comes, you see. That very, very famous passage. So there are a lot of different dimensions. It's something that one has to look into. That's the really interesting thing about getting to grips with Plato is it's so rich because of the format of the dialogues, the unsystematic format, not necessarily the unsystematic reality, the unsystematic format of the dialogues. It's so rich, and there's so much there, and there's so much that needs to be, so many layers that need to be unpacked. And I can't claim to know a great deal about exactly what purification is and what he intends by it. Well, you're not specifically asking about purification. That's definitely what would be involved, is purification of these various types. So there would be a purificatory element. There would be a dialectical element that would need to take place, because those are exactly that separation of the material from the real intelligible realm that underlies it. And that's what the person who's transfixed on images, again, it's not this very negative, again, very much like the Islamic, we don't have a negative attitude towards these, it's not a, it's not just pure condemnation of the route that goes via the images. It's just that they can't be an end in themselves. They become harmful and dangerous if they're made an end in themselves, because they're there for you to ascend through the ayat which are in them. I think we better close for today, unless anyone has a burning thing to say, because we've been here for an awfully long time. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here, and please keep us in your prayers. And we'll meet again, I think, in 2 weeks. What's 2 weeks from today? Let's have a look at the calendar. It's the 12th.
26th, I believe.
26th. I'll be back in England by then, but it would be Sidi Ahmed's thing the next day. That's fine. Yeah, I'll be joining you at a much more reasonable time, probably just the evening time we've already set, but I'll actually be in England, inshallah, by then. So we'll say that we'll meet, and obviously this is a very intermittent thing, so we don't always meet. When we say that we will, not sure. Anyway, thank you, everyone. Lovely to see you. Can't wait to see you, Sidi Isa, to conquer the world together, inshallah. Yalla, assalamu alaikum.
السلام عليكم جزاكم الله خير.